Welcome back, everybody. My name is Jason. This is Mohawk Motors. It's finally time to get back into some performance work on my own projects, and I'm super excited to get going on this one. I really can't wait to see what kind of difference a change in the rear end gear makes real life and not changing anything else. So let's swap the rear end in this truck. So if you've been here for a while, you're familiar with this truck. This is my 2007 Silverado Classic. I've got a playlist going on this one so you can catch up if you're not already familiar, but started life as a V6 truck. I converted it to a V8 truck and now has an L33 aluminum block 5.3 in it. And the next change I'm making to it is I'm swapping the rear axle. This is the factory rear differential. It's got a 323 gear ratio in it and open or G80 posi traction locker is what GM calls it. I'm swapping in the same rear from a 2006 Silverado, but this one has the optional 410 gear ratio and G80 locking differential. So we're going from 323 rear end gears to 410 rear end gears, which is a substantial change. It's almost a whole point higher. And I want to see what kind of difference this makes in the acceleration and 0 to 60 time and even quarter mile time on this truck, because it's a very budget possible upgrade. You know, you can go, and I'm not going to say you can find a 410 rear any day of the week because it was an optional ratio. But if you're vigilant and check the U-pull-it yards, junkyards, things near you, you can find these trucks with a 410 rear axle from the factory. And it's a very bolted in swap. You'll have to bleed the brakes a little bit. Depending on what you find, you may have to swap drums to discs or discs to drums, which is not difficult on these rear ends. And otherwise, they're bolt in. So mine currently has drum brakes. The one we're swapping in has drum brakes. And it should be a very drop in, drop out, drop in swap. I'm really hoping I can accomplish it tonight. I'll check the clock and see what time it is that I'm getting started on this thing. But if all goes smoothly, I'm hoping this can be like a couple hours and a couple $100 and a substantial performance improvement. So let's find out. So if you're not familiar with swapping a rear end, I'm going to try to give you some of the pointers and the major things to hit. Again, I am not changing the style of brakes. It has drum brakes now. The rear end I'm putting in has drum brakes. So that saves me a little bit of complexity. But first step is get the wheels off the truck, right? If I'm lucky, my drums should come right off too. Yes. There you go. The reason I take the drum off is because I need that drum out of the way to be able to access the parking brake cable. I want to save my parking brake cables, so I'm going to have to get it unhooked from inside here. And yeah, sometimes it can be a bit of a struggle, but we'll get it undone. If you're doing drum brakes, this will help you. If not, sorry, this won't be much help. But the way to get this parking brake cable released here, pull this little spring out of the brake shoe, remove your slack adjuster and your spring from the top. That'll give you access to the actual parking brake arm in the back. And then all you gotta do is collapse the spring back here enough to slip the little cable end out of the arm. Not super difficult. So I'm gonna do the same thing on the other side. I'm gonna disconnect my little retainer brackets, unbolt my shock absorbers, and then repeat. All right, everybody, it's about 9:15. I've been at it for about 45 minutes. And everything is disconnected except the U-bolts. Parking brake cables, brake line, the breather line, drive shaft. Everything's ready to go. Shock absorbers. Everything unbolted except the U-bolts. So I'm gonna unscrew these U-bolts and then hopefully lower the axle down in a controlled fashion. Not in a it falls to the floor and breaks stuff fashion. So we'll see. By the way, as someone who's lived in the Rust Belt my entire life, is this what it's like to work on stuff in like Arizona, California, not the Rust Belt? Because man, when stuff just comes apart, like I feel like I didn't even try, you know? No torch, no hammer. Stuff just comes apart. It's incredible. It's very relaxing. Okay, here we go. Attempting to lower a rear axle without dropping it, hurting myself, or breaking something. Take one. Ho-ho! Did it! And didn't even destroy the parking brake cable that tried to grab a hold of it. Alright, so I will get this one out of here and use the cherry picker to get the other one loaded up on. All right, guys, we've got a bit of a snag. So I've got my 410 rear diff up on the stand, and what I had suspected would be the case, the yoke on this diff uses a larger universal joint than the yoke in the two-wheel drive diff. And I suspect that's because the four-wheel drive trucks have a transfer case. The transfer case offers additional gear reduction and thus torque multiplication. So they just need a stronger universal joint at the back of the truck. So there's a couple ways I could resolve this. I could get an adapter universal joint to go from the two-wheel drive shaft to the four-wheel drive yoke. I already went out and checked a four-wheel drive shaft that I have on the shelf and the universal joint from that. And unfortunately, the cross pins of the universal joint are not the same size, so I can't just swap the caps. And what I think I'm going to do is swap the yokes on the differentials. So I'll take the yoke off of this one, off of the four-wheel drive differential, and put it onto the two-wheel drive differential and vice versa. And that's actually going to work out for me also because I have another four-wheel drive truck out here that I need to take the rear end out of. And I'm going to need to be able to hook the drive shaft up in that. I want to put this rear end under that truck. So I need to do it for two reasons. Instead of buying two different adapter joints, especially because this other truck is a parts truck, I'm just going to swap the yokes. That way I won't have to buy any special joints or anything like that. It'll just be a bolt up and go situation. So these 10-bolt rears, to my knowledge, from this part rearward on the yoke should be identical on the two differentials. It's the same housing, same pinion gear, same ring, like everything else is the same. It's just that you have a yoke for a different size U-joint. And these can be tricky. They use a crush collar, which if you tighten too far, then things get screwed up. If you don't tighten enough, things get screwed up. So I'm gonna do it, and then I'll show you what I did afterwards. Well, I've got the one going into the truck swapped over. I've got the yoke that I need to match my drive shaft in there now. I'm about to put the yoke that came off of that axle on the one that came out of the truck. Now, a couple things to point out, and just double check if you're gonna try to do something like this. There's two critical dimensions that you need to know about. First critical dimension is the outside diameter of this sealing surface. They need to be the same, obviously. Both of these measured exactly the same on the outside diameter. So I know my seal will seal, oil stays in, dirt stays out. The other critical dimension here is the distance from right here, the surface that will be pushing against your bearing and washer, and this surface in here where your exterior washer will be between the yoke and the nut. That distance from flat surface to flat surface, if it's not the same, then you're gonna have to account for that when you're putting this back together. Both of mine measured exactly the same. So all I did, when I took it apart, I made a paint pen mark. I counted how many turns it took me to back this nut all the way off. 10.5 turns. Once I had the yoke pushed on, then I lined it back up, tightened down my 10.5 turns, and gave it just a bump with the impact tighter. And that should be perfectly fine. I'm sure this differential was set up new, so I'll have just the teeniest amount of more preload on it now with my tighter nut, but because the bearings are worn now, I should still be well within spec. So I'm gonna repeat the process. This one was 10 turns to take the nut off, so I'll put my yoke on, tighten it back up, 10 turns, and a bump with the impact, and that differential should be good also. Another thing to be aware of when you do this, I smear some RTV on the splines, and then I put RTV on this flat surface and on the back side of the nut. There have been cases where gear oil will weep past the splines, past the washer, and past the nut. It'll give you a leak right out here, out the front of your yoke. And boy, let me tell you how frustrating it is to try to find that leak. So taking that little bit of time now, I shouldn't have any leaks. I shouldn't have anything to worry about. I'll be able to put this differential back in the truck, drive it another 100,000 miles without any concerns. So I'm gonna get that differential put back together. You can probably see that I took the time to needle scale and clean up this yoke. I'm gonna clean up this whole differential and just give it a little coat of paint just to make it look nice. I've got it out, now's the time to do it, so I'm gonna do it. Time for an update, everybody. So I got the 410 rear bolted back in. U-bolts tightened, shock absorbers tightened. I got the parking brakes hooked back up and put back in where they belong. I got a little sidetracked with some paint and then reminded myself at some point I want to take this truck as far apart as I am that silver truck and do a total frame off build on this thing too. But this is not that point. So I can spray some paint and make it look nice, but already this rear is 100% better than the one that was in it. And it's only a summertime rig now, so it should, for the most part, stay in the condition it's in. Got the drive shaft hooked back up, no problems there. So I'm gonna pop the cover, drain the oil out of it, because the stuff that leaked out while I was changing that pinion yoke looked gross. So we're gonna put fresh oil in it and just check everything out inside of there and finish getting everything else hooked back up. I gotta put the brake lines back on it and one or two little brackets, not much. So I'm gonna keep going. I'll bring you guys back once I've got it all back together. Well, everybody, you gotta love when you find a nice surprise. I popped the cover off of this thing and look what was inside. This thing does not have your run-of-the-mill G80 Gov lock locking differential. This thing has a spring type posi traction. What an awesome surprise. I'm pretty stoked about that. In GM trucks, the RPO code G80, it means there's some kind of posi traction unit in the rear differential. Now, in my experience, in pickup trucks and SUVs, G80, 90% of the time indicates what is commonly referred to as a Gov lock differential. It's a centrifugally actuated locker, essentially. Once one wheel spins fast enough faster than the other wheel, it flings out a little pawl that grabs a hold and shoves a ramp, and then essentially locks the rear wheels together. This type of posi is basically regulated by spring pressure. The more pressure those springs exert on the clutch packs on the outsides of the carrier, the closer to lock together the wheels are. Now, this will never actually lock the rear wheels together, but you can increase that spring pressure and really get close to holding them together. So this is a substantial upgrade. In my opinion, this is substantially better than the Gov lock differential because these are way less prone to failure. They do wear out over time. The clutches just get worn out like any type of clutch, but they're way, way, way less prone to failure, especially in an application like this, where we're gonna be feeding power to this differential and asking it to put power out to both wheels and stick it on the ground. So I am pleasantly surprised to find that in there, and really pumped to see that, especially because now, I mean, the differential would have been the limiting factor. I did not expect a long life out of a Gov lock differential in this truck, but seeing that, if it's worn out or if it starts to loosen up because the clutches are getting worn, I can just rebuild it, which is huge. So pretty pumped about that discovery, guys. That's awesome. Just thought I'd show you guys, just for verification. So this is an original AAM ring gear. There's the part number and there's the ratio, 410. I saw a part number stamped into the carrier. I'm gonna spin that around too and see if I can look that up, see if this is an original equipment posi traction or if it's been replaced at some point. The cover has definitely been off because it's sealed up with RTV, and they've got B's stamped over here. I'm not sure, usually you don't see that from the factory. That's usually when somebody other than the factory has been in there. So I'm gonna spin it around and see, maybe this thing originally had a Gov lock and it blew up like most of them do, and they had this put in. So I'm gonna find the part number on it. This diff was really dirty. I mean, really dirty. I'm glad I'm taking the time to clean it out. That'll hopefully help it live a long time. All right, everybody, I got to call it for the night. I want to keep going, but it's after midnight and I'm with my kids all day tomorrow. So I need to go get some sleep. But I did want to show you this before I go in. I found this part number on the differential. I don't know if you can see it there, but it's YDGGM 8.5-3-30-1. And when you punch that into the Google machine, it comes up with the Yukon Duragrip Limited Slip for GM 8.5 and 8.6 differential, 273 and up ratio, 30 spline. So it is not a factory differential in there. It is a Yukon Duragrip in there, which is awesome. I mean, I'm familiar with the Yukon Duragrip. I've installed one. I had one in a previous vehicle of mine. They work great. I'm hoping this one is still in good working condition. I don't see anything obviously wrong. The only thing that I'm not super sure about is it was super dirty inside of that differential. So we may have some worn clutches, but we won't know until we go out and try this thing. Worst case, we rebuild it. They do still make rebuild kits and clutch kits for this differential. So if it turns out it's worn out, the clutches are worn out, we can just go in there, rebuild it, and probably make it exactly what we want it to be anyway. So very excited about that. Was not expecting to find an aftermarket posi traction unit in this diff. But yeah, pumped to have it in there. So great note to end on for the night. I've got it all hosed down with brake parts cleaner. I'll let it drip dry overnight. And tomorrow, I'll come back out here and finish getting this thing all put back together. So I'll see you then. All right, guys, it's the next day. It's about 11 o'clock. I'm getting ready to head up, but I was able to get down here while the baby's napping. I brought the two bigger kids with me, and we got this thing put back together. Finished cleaning out the the differential. Got that all cover put back on, new RTV sealed up. Got the brake lines all hooked back up. Parking brakes, drums, shocks, breather, everything's back together. So I think I'm gonna hit it with a little bit of paint real quick. You know, just make it look a little bit better. And then I got to go up and get my little one up from his nap. But made progress. I do have the drain plug is open. So that should let any residual brake clean evaporate out of the diff, help the RTV set. And then this evening I'll be able to come back down here, fill it with oil, close it up, and reprogram the computer. You got to make that change in the computer so it's not trying to figure out why the output of the transmission is so much higher than the wheel speed. All right, everybody, a few hours later, evening now, and going through my mental checklist of what I need to do. I got to get this thing filled with oil. I'm going to spray a little more paint on it, try to fancy it up a little bit, and then I'm going to get it back down on the ground and tell the computer what I've done. The PCM uses the rear axle gear ratio, the transmission gear ratios, the tire size, all of that stuff to calculate and figure into shift strategy, torque management, all of those things. So I want to make sure it knows the right gear ratio. It also needs to know that just to make sure the speedometer is correct. So, yeah, I'm gonna spray a little paint, finish getting it filled with oil and getting the wheels and tires back on it, and then clean up my huge mess and get it on the ground. I'll probably bring you guys back when I'm into the computer and doing that stuff, give you an idea of how it goes. All right, everybody. So I think I accidentally deleted the video of actually changing the gear ratio in HP Tuners for the blue truck, but I've got a file open here for another truck that I'm working on, and I'll show you guys how to do it here. So when you're in HP Tuners, you download the tune from the truck, make sure you save it before you make any changes, and then you'll be at this screen here and you'll be able to make changes. So up in the top left corner where it says edit, click edit, and then you're going to look for the gear tire wizard. Now you can use this to change tire size or gear ratio. Depending on what the truck already is programmed for, that'll show over here in current. And you're going to input your new values over here in the right side column. In this case, this truck already had 410s, but if I were changing it, I would put my new ratio, let's say 3.73. I would click adjust. Oh, you need to put in the tire size also. If you're not changing, you just keep it the same. Once I've done that, I hit adjust. It'll say adjustment complete. And boom, there you have it. You can see now if I open the Gear Tire Wizard again, it registers the 373 change that I made. So I'm just going to put it back how I had it. Click adjust. Adjustment complete. All done. Good to go. And that's it. Once you've done that, then you'll go ahead and write to the vehicle. You don't need to do a write and tire, just a write calibration, and that'll make your change. You'll be good to go. It's time for a test drive. Back on the ground. Brakes are bled. Parking brake is adjusted. Differential is full of oil. All the bolts are tight. Everything is in place. Computer is reprogrammed for the 410 gear ratio. So, there's nothing left to do but take it for a test drive. Now, I'm not going to be able to bring you along because it's super dark outside. It's a little after 10 o'clock. So, I'll go now. Tomorrow I have to take a drive and I'm planning on using this truck. So I'll bring you along with me then and we'll see what kind of difference we made. All right, everybody. So we're outside. It's a nice, clear, sunny day. We're going to see if we can't get some after numbers, some results on if this rear end swap and gear change, as well as addition of a posi, made a difference for us. Driving the truck around, I put about 150 miles on it since doing the rear end swap. It's hard to say really if I feel a seat of my pants difference. I don't know if I do. I will say, even if we didn't actually gain much or any performance from it, we did gain that posi, so I am pretty happy about that. So we're here in Mexico. Let's give it a try. Try to get probably three runs in, 3 tests, and we'll go back and average them and see what we get. To push the button. We didn't even record that one. Okay, here we go. Second attempt. let's go back and see if we actually gained anything other than the posi. All right, guys, I'm back. I did the math, did the calculations, and they're not far off of what I expected. I had honestly hoped for a little bit more, but now thinking about it and thinking about the fact that we are still operating totally stock. We haven't changed anything other than the calibration for the rear end gear, so the computer knows what rear end it's working with. But the engine is on a factory tune, no changes at all other than the speed limiter removed. The transmission tuning, shift points, shift pressures, all of that is exactly the same. So like, for just making a mechanical change and giving the computer the updated information, now that I'm thinking about it, this totally makes sense. And I'm sure once we do some other modifications to the truck, this one will pay off more. But let me show you what we got, right? So I did 3 runs and I took my averages here. So 0 to 60, 3 runs, I had an average time of 6.59 seconds. 1/8 mile had an average time of 9.71 seconds. And 1/4 mile had an average time of 15.24 seconds. Now, I got my old numbers. Before we changed the rear end, our average 0 to 60 was 6.75 seconds. So we gained 1/10.5 in the 0 to 60, which honestly not bad. And really not surprising, right? That lower gear gives the engine and transmission more mechanical advantage to get the truck moving from a stop. So that totally makes sense. And that's about what I was expecting to happen. Now our 1/8 mile time, we went from 986 before to 971. So we gained 1/10.5. 1/10.5 in the 1/8 mile, in my opinion, I mean, it's an improvement worth mentioning. And for $250, you know, the price of a junkyard rear end, I don't think that's bad. I think that's a pretty good bang for your buck if you're out trying to race 1/8 mile. You know, this is really worth considering. It may gain you that extra 1/10 of a second or so that you're looking for. And then lastly, our 1/4 mile time, we were 1/100th of a second slower, which is negligible, but also expected. Changing the rear end gear really is not going to gain you much on the top side of the track. At that point, you're fighting aerodynamics. Your power is trying to overcome all the resistance against the vehicle. So not surprised at all that we didn't really make much improvement. We really stayed the same at the top end in the second half, but that's what I expected. You don't change a rear end gear to gain more top speed. So I think worthwhile. I'm happy with it. Like, worthwhile. I think overall I'm happy with this swap. Like I said, you know, depending on what the junkyard sells a rear end for near you, you can go pick one up for $250, maybe $300 if you have to buy some brake pads or something like that. For me, it was a rear end that I had left over from a truck I parted out. So no money spent and significant improvement in acceleration and 1/8 mile time. So yeah, I'm happy with it, guys. It's a worthwhile improvement. And I can already hear the keyboards typing away on a couple things here. First of all, this is not my daily driver. I am not concerned about mileage in this truck. I drive it for fun. I drive it on occasion. It is not something that I'm worried about fuel mileage or economy or anything like that. Second, yes, I did reuse U-bolts. This is a temporary suspension system in the truck. I have rear suspension upgrades planned in the near future that are going to replace the U-bolts. For the little bit of driving that I do and the amount of time until those U-bolts are going to get replaced, it just did not make sense to buy new U-bolts for this thing, especially because I had a really nice set that were not rusted or corroded or damaged in any way. They'll be more than fine for the few hundred miles, maybe 1,000 miles I put on this truck before I do the other rear suspension work to try to make it better. And third, shocks. It's still got factory shocks in the rear. I do want to get better shocks for it. I think they will help with traction in the rear. So they're going to come also when we do some suspension upgrades to this truck. But I think that's it for this video, guys. Worthwhile in my opinion. And if you're going to try it, if you're looking for that extra 1/10 of a second or so in the 8th mile or in your 0 to 60, it's maybe worth it for you too. We did make a substantial jump from 323 to 410, but even going from like 323 to 373 or 373 to 410, like you may not see as big a change, but I do believe you will see a change. And over everything else too, we gained a Yukon limited slip rear differential, which I was not expecting to be in there. I'm really pumped that it was. And I can tell from the little bit of skid marks over there where we were doing our testing, it is in fact working and it is in fact spinning both rear tires. So that in itself makes it worth the time and effort that I put into this. So thanks a lot for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed. If you have any questions or anything, drop them in the comments. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And until the next video, take care.